We talked about the common error that if you are having components that have a drawing in them, the default size is 0, 0. So that means if you create it, it's not going to show anything. You have to change the size. That's called set preferred size. Otherwise, you're not going to see anything. So there is a section that's talking about drawing a car. And if you have any drawing, the graphic 2D you're using, I believe, that would be the circle, the square, and those kind of things. If you don't do that, set preferred size, then you're not going to see anything. It's basically size 0, 0. So that's only needed for the painted component. Okay. So we kind of left it over here. We went over this, but we left at the end of it. So we want to talk about this. So we're going to start with processing the text input. So I'm going to have a text input. We're going to be drawing some stuff. I can do it with hand or have a graphic designer to design this if I want to send it to the customer, or I would get some graphic paper and I just draw it out. How do I want it to happen? Do I want this balance to be over here? I want it to the left, to the right, however I want to do it. And then we're going to decide how we're going to break these things down. So then we're going to ask the question, what kind of a layout do I want? And how do I organize these things? And then we can go from there. So when we're talking about this one, remember, we said that we're going to be using inheritance to make things a little easier. So if I want to use this class that's going to be inherited from JFrame, then the first thing I'm going to ask is, what components do I have? Because remember, every component that I have potentially can be an instance variable in my class. So when I'm looking at this, what components do I have in this? What are the components in this picture? Jonathan Dang.
The components are a J text field, J button, and 2 J labels, and possibly a J panel.
So we have a label here, we have another label here, we have a text box over here, and we have a button over here. So those are potentially are my component. I need these things. So I have to figure out where I'm going to be having those. Again, these are all design issues. We're going to be drawing it, and then we're going to define it. So now that I know I have 4 components, then I got to decide where do I want to put these components. So this is not, yeah. So of course, we're going to need our action perform for our button to put this stuff in it. So for this, for now, what is thinking, the design part, it says, you know what, I am going to be doing these things. I am going to be doing something with my balance, which is going to be the last one over here. So maybe I can create this one inside of the action perform, or maybe I can put it as an instance variable. Then we got to decide where we're going to go with it. And that's the design that we're going to be doing. So if I'm looking at this, what we're doing is we're going to grab the text from this one in the action listener. Action listener, we're going to add it to our button later on. So I'm going to grab the text from here. And remember, when I grab the text, it's going to be in a string format. So I have to go and change it to, double. So I'm going to grab the text by using the get text. Remember, we are using the dot operator to get the object with. So all of these things are objects. When we're creating these things, we're going to create object of each one of them. And then we're going to have a dot operator to tell us what we're going to have, the getters and setters as the generic type of thing. So if I want to get the text from this, I'm going to call the rate field.getText. And it's going to come in as a string. So I'm going to change it to double. And now that I have it as a double, I can do my calculation. So I'm only going to do that if I'm doing some kind of a calculation. If I don't have any calculation, I'm just going to keep it as a string. So I'm going to do my calculation. And now that I have my new balance, I want to put it right here in the other label. So what do? I'm going to use the object name of that label. You can call it anything you want, but it's a good idea to have good names for it so you know which object you're talking about. So the first one was called rate field. That's this one right here. And the negative, the bottom, the result one is called result label. So I'm going to set the text for that to this. So if I was changing the balance a lot, I could have a regular label for calling it balance. So I could potentially, again, all of these things are design issues. So I can have a label. So I could potentially add one more label. So I would say balance right here. So I would break this one to two sections. So my balance is always going to stay there. And then I would have a section, another label, that I would just put the other one. So I could, if I don't want to keep doing the word balance in there, I could just put it as a label. And then the second part can be another label that I can put, modify, change it. And that's for me not to have the word balance all the time. So I could separate those. Any questions so far? So these are the things that we talked already. So we're going to move on to this one. So we are thinking about doing it in a class inheritance. So what we're going to do is we could decide what components do we have. So we are going to create those ones over here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 components. I'm going to create 4 components over here. So the first one, we're going to call it rate label. Then we call it rate field. We're going to have a button and we're going to have a result label. So that's my rate label, a rate field, button, we can call it something, and a result label. We are defining them as instance variables. So that's going to be here. But remember, because these are all objects, we have to create them. We have to make them. You cannot just use the class. You have to create objects. So the question would come in and says, okay, where do we create these things? I can potentially create some methods to do some of these things. So the question is, am I going to make a method for each one of them? Or I'm going to make a method that's going to do a couple of them? So when we're deciding that we're going to be using this in the future, how generic can we make this? So every time we come back this, I don't have to start from scratch. I'm going to use this one for my other ones. So in this one, what is it going to do is, first of all, we're going to put our numbers for the finals. So we are creating the size of our frame over here. Again, this could be potentially in main. It doesn't have to be here. But what we have to have here is a default rate and the initial balance. So you're coming to my bank, you have to have at least $1,000 initial balance. And the default rate is 5% for now. And that's what we have. So we set the balance to the initial balance. Again, this is going to be for our testing purposes also. And then we're going to just set our label for balance, and we're going to put it over there. So it's going to, the balance is going to show 1,000 over here. So you started, it's going to be 1,000, it's going to show that. Then I'm going to go create the text field. I'm going to create a button, and I'm going to create a panel. Now, so for my create text field, I am going to create a label, and I'm going to create my text. So remember, whenever I have a text field, I want to have some kind of a information next to it for the user to know how is it happening. So we're going to put those things together. So when I'm creating my text field, I'm going to have a label to describe this text field. So the create text field method, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to create a label, I'm going to call it into a string. Then I'm going to create my text field. I'm going to set the width to 10. And then we want to put something in there. So for now, for the default one, when you first started, I'm going to put the default rate, which was 5%. So I'm going to set the text in my rate field to 5. So it's going to show 5 over here. So that would be my text field. So I already did this two part. Okay, so that's what's happening over here. Now, next one, I have my action listener. So do I create any object here or not? That's the question. Generally, we don't want to do that. We're just going to do the processing over here. So if I click on my button, what's going to happen over here? And we went over this already. The next one, it would be the create button. So for the create button, I have to create a button. Remember, I have to do that. And then I want to add the action listener to it. The next one would be create panel. So we're going to create a panel. We're going to add the rate label and the rate field to it. So I would go back and I said, okay, every instance variable that I created, I want to be sure that I have created those objects inside my program. So every instance variable that I have, I should have a new of that object. So I go through my program, I would have a check mark, I would list my instance variable, and I check it to be sure I have created the new objects, because that is, to me, that's a common mistake, that I put it as an instance variable, but I don't create an object of it, and then I'm going to have a problem. Okay, are we okay so far? This is what we talked before. We haven't started today thing yet. So that's what we had before. So we had a text field. Now, what about if we want to display more than one thing in there? So we're going to have something called text area. We can set the rows and column, and we can create a text area with those rows and column. So the rows are how many lines do we have, and the column is how many characters we can have. All right. And then we have something here that is called append. So we're going to be appending stuff to it. And of course, if we're appending, it's going to be right after each other. So we want to add \n to them. So when you display it, it's going to display it and it's going to go to the next line. And remember, we are doing these things as a string. So Java likes a string, so it does everything through strings. So that's the way we're going to do it. We have the append. Now we have something here that we can technically use it for the other ones too. That's called set editable. So if I set it to false, that means the user cannot modify my list. If I set it to true, that means the user can actually go and add more numbers to the list. So there is something is missing in there, they want to add to it, then we can set it to true or false. Now, let's look at this as the hierarchy. So all of that, Java is object-oriented language. So everything is a child of a superclass from somewhere. So we have J component, that everything's coming out of J component. And we want to focus on J text component, which we draw the J text field and J text area out of it. So because they're coming from there, they're going to have something common and they have something specific. So for example, the append is only for text area. The text field doesn't have append, but set text and set editable, it's common in both. That means it's coming in from the super. So if it's coming from the super, both of them are going to have it. So set editable can be applied to J text field. That means if I decide that I'm going to use my text field to display only, that would be something that we have been doing it through our labels. I can do my text field like that too. And then if I set the editable to false, the user cannot modify it. So you can have a text box, you can display things, but they cannot modify it. So we can do those kind of things in there. The set text, of course, and the get text, same thing for that. Another thing that we can add to this component is called the scroll pane. So we can add the scroll pane to it. We can have the vertical, horizontal, and basically if we have more number, we can scroll right and left or up and down for more, if the numbers are bigger or if I have more rows. Any questions so far? Okay, so you're going to do this. That should wake you up. So we have, so we're talking about the radio button, that is going to be only one of them can be on. So if I click, if the user click on another button, the previous one is going to go away. So to accomplish that, we have, of course, just like anything else, we have to create the radio buttons before we use them. So we're going to be using the new to create objects of radio button. But the key for radio button is that you have to group them. If you don't group them, then when you click on one, the other one is not going to be unchecked. So you need to group them, and you can have multiple of these groups. And then, of course, you're going to add it to your group. So it's a little more work, but that's the way we're going to do it. So how do I know which one is selected? I'm going to be using a Boolean that's called is selected. That's the way I know which one is selected. So I have a group of button, radio button, I'm going to call it whatever. And then if one of them is clicked, the other one cannot be clicked. And then I check it as is selected. So the way we're going to check it is like this. So I'm checking, this is the name of one of these things. So I have three of them in here, the three objects. So I can check to see if it's selected. So if it's selected, I'm going to do something. If the other one is selected, I'm going to do something. If the other one is selected, I'm going to do something. So we can check it as a Boolean. Questions so far? So we can have some other stuff to our radio buttons. We can create a border for our group, and we can set the title for the group that we have. The border is invisible. That means there is no border if you don't mention anything. But if you mention on it, it's going to have something in there. This edged border is a special one that we're creating over here. That's one way of doing it. What else? So again, when you have a interface, you're going to think about what layout managers you're going to be using. So if I'm looking at this, again, first I have to draw it. It doesn't have to be pretty. I will have some graphing paper for these kind of things. My drawing is not very good, and we can use some tools out there to do it, the electronic tools. So we can divide them in different ways. So if it was you, how would you break it down? Which layout would you use for these things? Which layout would you use? Do I need to call your name to talk to me? Xiaoxi Yang, what layout would you use for this? So what layouts did we have? We had flow. What else did we have?
Border layout.
Border, and what else?
Grid.
Grid. So if I want to use the border, I have north, center, south, west, east. So I can break this down to sections. So let's say if I want to use it like this, so I can break it down to the top level and bottom level. And when I am in the bottom level, I can break it down to this. They can potentially be flow if I don't have any reason to have them set in certain ways, or I can have them as a grid if I want to. I can have this one, the bottom part, to be divided into sections, or I can have the whole thing to be. So remember, if I want to have different rows, then I have to go with grid layout. If I want to put the north, south, then I have to go with which one? Border layout. Okay, so that's what we're going to be thinking, and then you're going to be designing it based on those things. So we're going to be looking at the checkboxes over here. So we did our radio buttons. We grouped them. So if they click on the small, the large is going to go away. I'm going to be checking them to see which one is selected. Now we're going to talk about the checkbox. Checkbox in general are going to be displayed as a square. And then those are the choices that you can have more than one, as you know. And they don't have to be grouped because they are working independently. They don't have to be in the same group. So I don't need to group my checkboxes, but I do need to group my radio buttons. So we have a couple of checkboxes that in that picture that we're going to be working on. And so radio buttons generally are round, checkboxes are square. Again, if you don't do your radio, if you don't group your radio buttons, then it's going to act like a checkbox. So we're going to be sure we do that. So how do we do it? We're going to create an object of the checkbox. And then we can use the is selected for the checkbox as well to see if it's selected or not. And that way we can check it. We're moving on to a little more different things that we can do with this GUI part. We can have a combo box that you can have a drop down and you can choose one of those things. That would be a combo box. So you can have a list of items in there. So you can have it set as a close or as an open. If it's closed, it's going to show only one thing, whatever you tell it as a default one. And if it's open, it's going to show more than one thing. It can be editable, so you can edit it, or you don't want to do that. So if you have a list that you want the user to add something, if it's not there, you put the editable on. I would say majority of time is off. So I can add these things in there. So we create a combo box and then we add items to the combo box. And as we adding, it's going to go through the list and it's going to keep putting it on the bottom. So we're going to have a list of these things. And then we can check to see which one is selected. So remember, these are objects. So when you're putting it, it's going to go as an object. So maybe we're going to need to cast it to the string if you want to use it. So for example, if I get the selected item, so I have the combo box, I'm going to get selected item that is coming in as an object because it's coming in from the top level. And then I can force it to be a string. Now I can read it as a string. So I'm going to, so in this case is serif, sans serif, and those kind of things. So when it says which one is selected, when I call the get selected, it's going to return this. I'm going to force it to be a string. Then if serif was selected, then my string selected the string becomes serif. So this could be an open one. That's going to be open, and then you can scroll down and choose one of these. So now that we have all of these things, we're going to figure out how to handle the input events. Remember, you can have action listeners. So in your text box, you can connect it in a way that if somebody push a key, you would accept it and do something about it.
How would you handle how would you handle like errors or something?
So what again?
How would you handle like some type of errors or something?
You can have the mouse over, you can have a mouse leave, you can have the keyboard. We're going to get to those things.
Okay, thank you.
So if it's selected, then we can do something about it. Now, in this case, it's talking about the design part. It says, okay, we are going to just take the part, the top one, we're going to call it as the center. The bottom part, we're going to call it as south. And then the bottom part, we're going to break it down to 3 different ones. So we're going to be using the grid over here. And then in each one of them, we're going to add these things to it. So we're going to go from the top to bottom, and then we're going to build the bottom to top. So what do we want to talk about here? So why do we want to use the combo box instead of the radio button? So it depends on how you want to choose it. And of course, if you have a larger list, it's going to be harder to do the radio button. Let's say you have 20 elements, then using the radio button is not going to be easy to do it. The drop down would be much easier to do it. So if I have a lot in my list, most likely I'm going to go with the drop down list or combo box. So if I put the 2 checkboxes in a button group, and again, you got to try these things to see how does it work. So you can make your checkboxes to act like radio button. You can have your radio button to act like checkboxes. So the only difference is the group. So if you put them in a group, only one can be selected. If you don't put them in a group, you can have more than one selected. So if I want to have a 2 border instead of 1, we can have it as, again, every time we want to add more stuff, we're going to do it through the panels. So we can create a panel and then set that to a certain border. We create another panel, we set that to another border, and then we add. So when we create a listener, we can have a listener to do for more than one or just one. It depends on how we're going to do it. So if one of them is set, then we can call the action center listener. So the question here is, why was the combo box placed inside the panel? You could just put the combo box up there, but remember, if it's not part of the panel and we don't adjust it where it goes, it can grow and fill up the rest of the stuff. So if you have it in a border and you put just something in there, it's just going to grow and shrink based on the where it is. But when you put it in the panel, it's going to be a little more manageable. Okay, so if you see something like this, how can you make this more user-friendly?
You can make it larger, I guess. Like the size.
Do you understand what is this doing as a
You make
user?
the size of the button larger, I guess.
No, if you look at this, what do you expect to happen?
Click yes or no.
Okay, so so you could use the checkbox, just say, is it bold, or if it's bold, check here. So how do we choose what we're going to be doing? I'm just quickly go over this. Please do read these things. I'm not covering everything. So if it's horizontal component, we're going to use the flow layout. We're going to put them right after each other. If it's a vertical, we're going to use the grid. We're going to have rows and columns. If we have a group, we can have them as one blob, or we can have the other ones next to each other. Let me see how far I want to go. I am considering the time at the end. So this is the code to create that thing that we were showing. Remember how we're going to do it. We're going to do one section at a time. So we're going to create a radio button panel. We're going to put those radio buttons in there. We're going to add it to, we're going to have the checkbox panel. We're going to have the radio button. We're going to do those. We're going to add to it. We're going to have the price panel. We're going to add this stuff to it. including the text field, and we're going to create the center panel. So the naming is for us to understand where everything goes. We can call it panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, but naming it in a way that it makes sense. And then we can add them to the frame. So we said all of these things. It's a lot of work, a lot of typing. We can reuse it. And I want to do that because I want to understand it. But there are tools out there. So if you're doing the GUI building with Java, there are some tools out there. You can use GUI Builder tools. Most of your IDEs have that tool. I don't want to start with that because I want you to understand what's happening behind the scene. One, two, even if you do your tools for GUI Builder, then sometimes you have to manually go in there and modify some stuff. So it's going to take a lot of typing away from you. But what I'm worried about, if you would start with this, you would not understand the behind the scene of what's going on. So you would have, if you guys work in your C++ with Qt, that's very, very similar. I don't know why they changed Qt to SNMF GUI. This is going to be a lot more closest to Qt and things like that. So you're basically going to be looking at the components. You can grab and drop it over here. You can connect them together. You can modify them right here. So if it has some action, that would be your action listener over there. You can check the color. You can change the name of it. So you can call it something, whatever you want to call it. You can change the font and all those kind of things. So you grab one of these, you put it over there, you're going to have a window here that you can change it. You can have the event, you can have the code for it, and it is under the netbeans.org. So you can play with that. I want to go over this. So we have something called the menus. So that's going to be look like windows that we are using for the application that we're running in Mac or PC. So we have a menu bar that we can add stuff to it. So we can call the J menu bar, and that's going to be like these things. So we can have menu bar on the top. I asked you guys to do this for, was it a lab or assignment that you guys are going to be doing to create something similar to this. And the thing is, you can go one level, you can have multiple level. So in this font, you have one level under another level under there. So you can have a submenu that's going to have submenus. So you're going to create the menu. That's the way you're going to create your menu, file and font. You're going to put it. You're going to add it to your menu bar. And then you're going to create your sub items. So these are the exit item. That's going to call it for exit. You're going to add it to the file menu. So if you drop the file menu, you click on the file menu, you're going to see the exit in there. You can exit. You can create some other ones and you can add it to the other one. In this case, we are adding it to the font menu. So we have our main menu, we're creating a sub menu, and then we can have a sub menu to our sub menus. We got to have the listener for each menu. So when you click on it, we're going to do some action. So in this case, if I go file exit, I want to get out of the program. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to create a listener. I'm going to add this action listener to this one, to the exit. Then I can go right on it. So we can create methods to do these kind of things for us, to kind of organize them. So that way we don't have to do, again, here in this chapter, you're learning that how important is your design, the thinking before you start writing code. You start writing code, it's going to get very, very messy. So we are grouping them. We're calling it as a method. So we can build these things and then return a menu. That would be the submenu that we're talking about. We are going to be adding some action listeners that we can do in there. What else? So for that, we're going to be looking into the inner class instead of having it outside. So we're going to create an inner class for our listener. Remember, two reasons that we're doing that. One is it's going to be only called here. Most likely, this is not going to, generally, this is not called somewhere else. And then we can have access to the things that's available around it. Okay, I want to get out of this so I have some time for the people who want to talk to me. Okay, I want to talk about these things, and I want to, if you feel like you are the top student, if you think that you are an A student, I would challenge you to do this. It's a very interesting part. Again, there is tons of stuff available in Java GUI, but some of these things can be interesting, and you can look at the documents available in Java library, in Java documentation. Used to be Sun microsystem, now Oracle has it. So you can go in there and look at all these things. But I would challenge you to do some of these things. So this is called a slider. So you can have a sliders that you can put some range in it, and based on that range, you can do something. So in this case, you would have this one that goes sideways. You can have this one that goes up and down, vertical. You can put some numbers next to it if you want to. So in this case, I have 0 to 5 and 10, 10, 11. These ones don't have anything in there. You can have a percent. Generally, just check it with the percentage. So if you do that, you're going to get the value. So you're going to have the minimum, maximum, and you're going to get the value. That's going to set it over there. So when you start, where do you want this to be? So if I have my value from 0 to 100, I'm going to set 60. So when you open my program, it's going to go sit on 60. And the other one's the same way. We're going to, when it changes, we're going to have an action listener. So as soon as somebody move the bar, left, right, up, down, then the action listener is going to come in, and it's going to be more generic one. So we're going to accept it as an object, and we're going to figure out what to do with it. Again, the documentation is available for Java, in Oracle, NetBeans. So in this case, we have 3 bars. Each one of them is going to give me a number for red, green, blue. Remember, the RGB is 3 bytes. Each one of them is 1 byte. 1 byte can be from 0 to 255, which is going to give me 256 combination. And when we mix them up, we can create a color. So in this example, which I strongly suggest you go over it by yourself, it's just going to have these things. So as soon as I move one of the bars, it's going to call the action. And based on that, it's going to calculate the color, and it's going to set the background color of this one to whatever we have over here. So if I put these 2 at the left and this one to the right, I would get red, and then green, and then blue. So if one of them is all the way to the right and the other one's all the way to the left, you're going to get these colors.